All right, well, good morning. We weren't sure if this was going to be something people were interested in, so it's nice to see so many faces. The handouts that I have given you, if you want to follow along, you can, but I also don't want you to feel like I need to read. This is the presentation I'm following. So I gave these to you so that you wouldn't have to scribble. So don't, if reading along helps you, that's fine. If you don't need to read along, that's fine too. It just gives you everything you need. Also, this presentation has a lot of web links in it. If you are somebody that is web savvy and you would rather not have to type in the 80 characters, I'll put a sheet over on the side. If you print your email to me, I will send you all of the links in an email. But that will be in a week because I'm off this week and it's on my work computer. So it wouldn't be till not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. But anyway, I'm so glad to see so many faces here because in my line of work, I talk with families on a daily basis about end-of-life decisions. And so I see, with several hundred deaths a year that kind of pass across my desk, I see a really wide variety of things that happen with families. And one of the things that I see the most often is families that have not had the conversation at all, or they've had the conversation, but not everybody has heard the same conversation, or nothing is in writing and we're not sure what has actually been said. And so the tools that I'm bringing you today are all free except for one. They're all online tools or things that you can print out. I've printed some of them out for you so you can grab them afterwards, but these are all tools to help you with those kinds of things. So I'm just going to go through the presentation. If you want to follow along, that's fine. I always start with the Snoopy cartoon because Snoopy and Charlie Brown are sitting on a dock, and Charlie Brown says, "Someday we're all going to die, Snoopy." And Snoopy says, "True, but on the other days we will not." And I think that's important to keep track of, right? Because we don't talk about death. We don't like to talk about death as a society. And in fact, I'm reading a book right now that's talking about the fact that in 4 short generations, we have come from being a society at the turn of the century of the 18th, when we turned to 18th to 19th century, death was very much a part of the community, and children were around death, and they saw people's decline. In a short 4 to 5 generations, we have completely flip-flopped, where death is not talked about, and all of the advertising is about looking young and, fancy and thin and all those things, and so we pretend like death doesn't happen, and that's why these kind of statistics happen. So, like I said when I did the talk at church, 92% of people say talking with their loved one about their end-of-care life is important, but we find, this study was done in 2018, that only 32% of people have actually done so. So that's reflective of what I'm telling you about. So the tools, and if there's questions as we go along, please feel free to raise your hand. They're recording me because they want to just kind of capture this. When they asked me about that, that's fine, but I need to make sure that all of you know that I am not a lawyer. Okay, so I'm giving you all kinds of resources, but you cannot take this as legal counsel, okay? So I just need to make sure that I'm clear about that. But anyway, so only 32% of people have actually done so. 97% of us in the United States think that writing it down is important. 37% have actually done it. 21% said they haven't talked about this because they don't want to upset their loved ones, and 53% say that they would be relieved if their loved one would start the conversation. So some of the tools that I'm giving you today are tools on how to start that conversation and kind of ideas around how to do that, okay? So I just thought I would toss in a scripture because people, it's good to tie back to the Bible. It's always helpful to remind myself, I remind families when they're in crisis, that every day of our life was recorded in God's book. And every moment was laid out before a single day passed. So even with all of these treatments that we have, God already knows, right? And so when people anguish or there's a lot of confusion around, what should we do, what should we not do, I'm quick to remind them that God already had a plan in place and that there's always a faith piece in this. So the forms. Let me just kind of tell you about the forms that are available to you. Most of these can be found online. The Illinois Advanced Directory form, that's the, I have some of those here. It's called the Medical Power of Attorney, and this is the form that you use for medical decisions. That is different than the form that you use for your assets. If you are talking about your assets, anything to do with finance, property, you need to talk to a lawyer and get it done properly and legally. Not that this isn't legal, but you don't need a lawyer to do the medical power of attorney. So this is talking about who needed copies. Are there some coming? Oh, sorry. Okay, how many do we need? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Please, thank you so much. So that is the form that I'm recommending. There are other forms, but this one is the one that Illinois, if you click on Illinois State, this is the one that they use. I have copies up here if you want to see one. The second form that I've listed for you is a new resource. So I have not had a lot of time to spend on it, but My Directives is now an online version of listing all of your end-of-life wishes, which is really helpful if you can't find, or you're somebody that can't find paperwork easily, because you never know when crisis is going to hit, right? And so this is a new line. I haven't had a lot of time to spend on the website, but they're starting to offer an online version where you can list all of your wishes so they can be accessed from anywhere that you can access the internet, which is a nice change. The third document that I listed for you is the 5 wishes. This is the only one that is not free, but it is only $5. It's recognized in over 30 states. Illinois is one of the states that offers it. You would have to order it if you want one. I meant to bring you some copies, and I accidentally packed them in one of my 40 moving boxes yesterday, and so I couldn't bring them. But anyway, it's the only one that is not free. Illinois Healthcare Surrogacy Act, I'm going to touch on that in a couple minutes. That's basically talks about how the law works if you don't have people in place for your medical decisions, like what the law says, who gets decisional rights. DNR and post form, there's a lot of confusion around this. If you had a DNR made out, do not resuscitate order, if you had that made out even 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, that form looks different than it does today. They have shifted that form to what they now call the POST form, which is the physician order for life-sustaining treatment. Both are legal, both are recognized. The difference is the DNR form does not give as many options as the POST form. So if you have an older DNR, you might want to hop online, look at a POST form, and see what the differences are, and think about if you want to. It just gives you more options for treatment or not choosing treatment. So they've just made it a lot more comprehensive. And if you went online today and put in DNR form, it's going to come up as a POST form. So they've updated everything. But if you have the old copies, you might want to look into that just so it's more clear. They are one and the same now. Yeah, pretty much the old DNR form is not used, but it's not that it's not legal. You can still use it. If you have one filled out, it is legal and it is recognized, but it gives you fewer choices than the new form. You don't need both. You can, but if you want to have all of your options listed out, you're going to want to update to a POST. Yeah, that's a recent change. That change was happening when I was in residency. It was about 4 years ago that we started to see the new form. So it's just an update. If you, like I said, they're both legal. They'll both be recognized. One just gives you more choices. Yeah, and I listed at the bottom. So the POST just covers a larger variety of end-of-life treatments, okay? So the forms are the conversations. This is the place that it gets sticky for people. There are 2 places online that are really helpful if you want to figure out how to have this conversation with your family members. There is Prepare, which is prepareforyourcare.org. This one is state-specific. So the ones that I have printed out for you today, there's 20 or so. The ones I printed, if you're somebody that can print on the internet, maybe don't take a printed one, because some people are not very savvy at that. This one is one of the ones that helps you walk through how to choose a medical decision maker. Many people assume that your medical decisions should be made by the person that's closest to you. That may not be the case, and here's why. You want to make sure that whoever you choose, this is who's going to make medical decisions for you if you can't make your own, okay? You want to make sure that whoever you choose will be able to make decisions based on what you want. Sometimes the person who is closest to you loves you so much that they have a hard time making that choice, okay? So the ways that plays out in my family, typically it would be my mother. That's what people would assume. But my mother has already buried a lot of her family members, and I do not want her to go through that grief. So my sister is my medical power of attorney. So you want to be thinking about who is the person that will make decisions based on what I said I wanted, not on what they want. Okay, so that's one of the distinctions. It will also walk you through what matters most to you. I have another tool I'm going to hand out in a minute that will help you because quality of life is different for everybody. All of us have different things. I've had people who, like they said, as soon as I can't eat Giordano's pizza anymore, that's it. And that's valid. This is somebody that was a food critic, and so that happens. There's other people that say, as long as I can, still have people visit and I recognize them, that's my quality of life. So there are ways to kind of narrow down what is important to you. I'm going to hand one of them out in a minute, but we'll wait. Yeah. You can have more than one. The form gives you space to list 2 medical decision makers, but you still have to list a primary. Okay, so my mom listed my sister because she lives closer, but I'm listed as secondary. Yeah, and honestly, my sister would make decisions without talking to me, but yeah. So 2 is what the form gives you to list. It also talks about how much flexibility you want that decision maker to have. You can say, I want you to do exactly what I say, don't deviate. You can say, I want you to do what I say unless the doctor, you talk to the doctor and you think that we should adjust. So it kind of gives you a little bit of leeway to list what you want. It also talks about how to talk to your doctor, because some doctors don't like to have this conversation. In fact, a lot of doctors don't, because we pay doctors to heal us, right? That's what we want them to do. Some doctors have a really hard time making the transition to healing is not going to happen anymore. So it gives you some questions to kind of talk to your provider or say, these are the kinds of things that are important to me, because they are definitely part of that. And then it gives you some additional questions as far as religious preferences, burial wishes, and also gives you some next steps. So that's the prepareforyourcare.org. The second resource I printed out for you, or just giving the link for as well, is the Conversation Project. That's where all the statistics I read to you came from. So the Conversation Project started because they realized that people weren't having the conversation, right? And so this one is set up a little bit more towards how do you get the conversation going, as far as thinking about who you want to be there, what works best, how much do you want to talk about at a certain time. So it kind of walks you through all those. So the 2 are a little bit different. They work very well as companions to each other. One of the reasons I really like the Conversation Project is it comes in multiple languages that are all downloadable and free. It also has suggestions for how to do this when you're talking to people with Alzheimer's or dementia, which is a different kind of a conversation. How you explain things are different. So they have multiple versions. All of these are downloadable. All of these are free, which is what I love about them. So can I have one more hander outer? Can somebody hand out? Yeah. So this one, if you flip the page, this is the Go Wish game. So I know that we don't have enough for everybody, but I want you to we're going to take a couple minutes, take a look at this list and see if you can identify. So if I told you that you have 6 months to live, and you were trying to identify what was most important to you, look at this list and see if you can come up with your top 5. Yep.
My last will is dated on 2001.
Your power of attorney, the date is still effective as long as you have not crossed it out and changed it. Yep. Yep. So, sorry, we're still passing them out. I should have brought more. I apologize.
I got a codicil for my last will and testament.
You have a condition? But you're talking about last will and testament. That's different. This is medical power of attorney. Yeah, these are different. That's a different document, yeah. I'm sorry that you're sharing. No, I'm okay. So just a quick glance at the list. See if you can narrow it down to 5 things. It's hard to do. It's very hard to do. 10 is the most that they want to let you pick. But I'll just let you look at the list. So this list is going to be different for everybody. The wild card means you can choose something like Giordano's Pizza, which for some people is the really important thing. Who needed extra copies of the presentation? Thank you, Pastor Howard. You can get this online, so no. I'm going to say no. Yeah. All right, you've had enough time to look at the list. So if you wanted to do this online, you can buy the Go Wish game if you want to. This is called the Go Wish game. But you can also go to Go Wish online. It's listed on your sheet. And you can play a game. And what they do is they list all of these things for you, and you're able to slide them into most important, kind of important, I really don't care. And the most that it will let you put in very important is 10. And the idea behind this is that many of us, I'm going to include myself in this too, I look at this list and I'm like, well, I want all of these, right? That's kind of how we are. But the reality is, when you get to end of life, we start to not have that many choices, or those choices start to limit, right? And so it's important, as we're talking about these documents, as you're listing your wishes, it's important that you kind of narrow down exactly what is most important to you. And this is a nice kind of a starting point. These aren't all the answers you could come up with, but I think it's a nice comprehensive way to kind of go, okay, yeah, these 10 really are what is most important to me. And so, like I said, this is just a list for you to look at, but you can go online and you play the game. It will let you save it and print it too, which is kind of nice. But that's a helpful thing to kind of look at as you're talking through these things with your family, so that they're really clear. Now, there's a couple other resources I'm going to touch on, but I want to bring up a couple more things before I do that. First of all of these conversations are for naught, or they can be for naught if you don't get it in writing. Because what happens is, and this plays out commonly in my work, mom will talk to child number 1 and child number 2 and child number 3, and she will say exactly the same thing to all 3 of them. But child number 1 will hear one thing, child number 2 will hear something different, and child number 3 won't even remember the conversation. Okay? And so then what happens is, when we get to end-of-life care, nobody knows exactly what mom wants. And there's a lot of angst around that. And there's a lot of thinking you're going to make the wrong decision. And what if we choose what she didn't want? If a family family members have a document that they can go back to that very clearly says to them in writing exactly what you want, it doesn't make the decision any less sorrowful, because it's going to be emotional, but it makes it much less stressful and much easier for families to do. Okay? So getting it in writing is the first thing that's really, really important. The second thing is, you need to make sure people have copies of it. Because again, if it's in writing and nobody can find it, that doesn't help. It also does not help if it's in writing and you can't produce it to the hospital. Okay, so if you do not have the access to those papers, by law, they have to try and resuscitate you, or they have to try and do certain things, unless you say otherwise, and you have to be able to provide the documentation. Yes? These do not have to be notarized, they do need to be witnessed. And the form talks about who can and who can't witness. It can't be family members, somebody with a vested financial interest. That's why chaplains get into this conversation so often, because I witness a lot of these. So I think they request 2 witnesses, but not notarized. That's where it's a little bit different than a will. So other things that I wanted to touch, I said I would talk about the Surrogacy Act. So if you have nothing in place, and there's no paperwork they can follow, Illinois law has a hierarchy of who can make decisions for you, just so you know. So the order in Illinois is yourself first, or your guardian, then spouse, then adult children, and they go by majority. So if you have 3 children, so you have 3 children, you can get a majority. If you have 2 children and they don't agree, you can get a stalemate, and that becomes a sticking point, and it happens more often than I like. Then it goes to either parent, adult brother and sister, and then grandchildren and friend. So those are just kind of the basics. I offered you a couple other just things to consider, to look at. There are 2 really good frontline episodes. Both of them are about an hour long. And I can, again, if you want me to email it to you so you don't have to write these all out. But they talk about these end-of-life decisions. And they do a really good job of showing kind of how this plays out in the hospital. They also do a very good job of talking about how doctors get very conflicted about just because they can do something doesn't mean they should do something. Because medical science will always have another option you can try. But at some point, sounds like I just killed a bat. Oh, there we go. At some point, those options don't become very helpful, and they get very conflicted when family members are still pushing for care that they don't think, well, surgeries, they won't happen. One of the statistics financially is that it's in the top 3, I believe, might be 5, reasons for bankruptcy is end-of-life care costs. So it's these end-of-life decisions when people don't know what to do, they just kind of press for more and more and more and more, and it ends up not being very helpful and ends up being very expensive and painful for a lot of people. So what other I think that's all I gave you. Oh, at the back, I just did one other thing. So there's a TED Talk about this is another company that realized that we weren't having these conversations, and he talks about this concept of death over dinner. So he talks about why we're not having these conversations, and this is another site that gives you some ideas for ways to start the conversation. So now, any questions I haven't covered, or anything I haven't thought of that you wanted to know about? Yeah.
Well, I asked every churches about the cremation, and the lowest price is 3,000.
I've seen cremations as low as 500. Yeah.
Now, I just want to let everybody know, as I'm a nurse, and I've seen so many arguments about this when it comes to death. So I enrolled in the Genesis, that is a school, so that my body will be donated because I'm in the medical. And they emailed me, and it is free, not like the other company, my children have to pay for the transportation.
If you donate, yes, then they cover the fees.
One is free, but they just send me back because I have only one witness, so civil witness. But I just to let everybody know, if something happens to me, the churches and everything, and I prefer the pastor or the chaplain to witness me, and I am already prepared. So these are the form, and I already completed. All I did is one witness, and I'm donating my body. And they said that your ashes will be saved through them unless the family. But I said I want the ashes to be thrown to the Lake Michigan.
Yeah. Any other questions or observations? Yeah.
Do you find that it's helpful to pre-plan?
Do I find that it's helpful to pre-plan? So I find that families that have pre-planned are a lot less stressed out in the moment, because then they can just focus on spending time together, and they're not worried about if they can afford to spend time together. So yes, having funeral arrangements, or at least an idea of what you want. Some people prepay, some people don't. But as long as, it's when they're trying to deal with all of that on top of trying to, spend however much time they have together, that it really stresses, it stresses families to the max that are already really stressed out. And that's part of how this conversation came to be, because I'm walking in the door when, I can't really do much about it, and trying to walk them through this when it could have been done a long time ago and very clearly been laid out. And that's why we decided to offer this. Any other questions?
It is really very important to have a pre-plan because I have seen it so many families have problems here and there.
Yeah, there's problems when you don't pre-plan too. Yeah. It doesn't hurt to let your family know exactly what you want when it comes to burial as well. Yeah. That just wasn't today's topic. Today, there's a whole lot of topics I could talk about. This was the most pressing because I'm part of the ethics committee, so I pull staff together when we've got an ethics concern, and we usually have 2 or 3 of these running at a time. So where people are not agreeing on treatments and we're having to mediate. Yeah. You need to look, so she asked if you have to register a power of attorney in different states. You need to look at each state and see how the power of attorney, each state has its own power of attorney form. So the one that I brought today has Illinois clearly written on it. If you're going to be in different states, you mean like if you're traveling or living in different states? Yes, you need a power, the medical power of attorney needs to be in the state of residence of the person that it is for. So, I can't, I have to have an Illinois one, I can't have a Colorado one. Yeah. Yeah, so it's the state that whoever the form is for, it has to be the state they reside in. Yeah. Some people include it when they do a will with a lawyer, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, this was just because those are kind of separate things. I wanted to make sure you had the resources for this piece, especially because most of them are free. People get kind of hung up on, their concern is going to cost a whole lot of money, and this doesn't cost you nothing. In the 5 wishes document, Illinois is included, yes. The 5 wishes document on the second page tells you all of the states that recognize it. The other ones actually don't discount it. It's just not an official form with that state. I'm not sure why that panned out that way, but it did. Yeah.
It's in your will. How does that work out? The will really doesn't come into play until you get.
Yeah, that's why most people separate will, and he was asking if it's in your will, how does that play out? Most people have 2 separate documents. Yeah, so the medical power of attorney, because you wouldn't typically hand your will over to somebody at a hospital. You will hand the medical wishes form or a copy of it to somebody in a hospital. And anybody that you list on that form, I would suggest you give them a copy, because then they have it in hand. You can nullify yours anytime. So these are, you can cross it out and say this is no longer void. You can redo it. You can change your mind at any time. You just need to make sure that your family has updated copies, because they'll go by the most recent date. Yeah.
We recently, within the past few years, discovered that your will is not registered until you die. And if you do not, someone doesn't have a copy of that will.
And that's a different document, which is what I'm not here to talk about wills, because you need legal counsel for wills.
I know that, but
So, yeah, I just don't have that.
we didn't know that it weren't filed. We thought as soon as you fill it out, the attorney files it. But they don't file it until you die. And if your family doesn't know who the attorney is, it never gets filed.
Lou, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, but I did live in this world.
You live in the world more than I do. Go ahead.
Just to be clear, a couple points to make. A will is a different document than a medical power of attorney, or any power of attorney for that matter. It's also a different document than the PULSE or the full DNR. So it's important to understand those are 3 different documents. A will does not get filed, you're using the word register, a will does not get filed anywhere unless your estate goes to probate. And there are certain qualifications that require that a will goes to, that an estate goes to probate. A lot of estates will not ever go to probate, but, so your point is well made. You have your attorney has a copy, like our attorney has a copy, but to Karen's point, it's important that your family has copies of these documents, all of the different documents.
Yeah.
Because they don't get filed with the court, they are not public documents unless after the die it goes to probate, which may or may not happen, so it may never be a public document.
Yeah. And like I don't have a lot of will experience. They don't call chaplains in for wills usually. We get pulled into these instead.
I mean to say my will, my attorney has a copy of that.
Your attorney should have a copy of your will. Yes. Your family needs to know who your attorney is. Otherwise, they won't know where to find it. Yeah. Any other questions? Observations? Okay, so I printed out a few things for you. We weren't sure how many, and so I did 20 of each. But let me just leave a sheet on the side. If you want to have all of these links emailed to you so you can just click on them, I'm happy to do that. That's very easy for me to do. I've got 20 each of both of the conversation guides up here, as well as 20 of the Illinois Medical Power of Attorney if you would like it. And other than that, that's all I promised you 15, 20 minutes. It was a little bit long. All right. Thanks for coming. I was happy to bring, yeah, oh, one more question, sorry. Oh, Jolene, thank you. It's, you know, I just appreciate, and let me tell you, I just appreciate your interest. I always push, you know, I've had this conversation as young as 23 with a 23-year-old, and so I'm always pushing for this because people as a society, I'm included, we don't like to talk about this, and then you end up in crisis. That just doesn't need to happen. And so thank you for letting me do that, because that makes my job a lot easier. We can just focus on relationships. So, all right, I'm going to put the list over here if you want to put your email.